Well, it's about 4:30, and you've been at this for 3 days now.
We have all the time, so don't worry about it, sir.
Judge Zager and I, while we were waiting, calculated that he was number 51 and I'm number 52. So given that and the time of day and what you've been through, I doubt that I have the eloquence or the rhetorical skills to overwhelm you with a 10-minute dialogue on who I am and what I am. I've submitted the written materials that were requested. I think that should give you a written background as to my experience and some of my thoughts. Even though I've tried probably 150, 200 jury trials, I've never given up an opportunity to make an opening statement. Today, I think I will. There's another reason for that. Secondly, is since I've been a magistrate, and it's just been for a year and a half, I've noticed that attorneys and litigants oftentimes want to talk about what's important to them as opposed to what is important to me and trying to get to the nub of the case, as Lincoln used to say, or to what's critical. And rather than doing that today, talking about what's important to me, I would much rather give you an opportunity to ask any questions and respond to those so I can give you the information that you need to evaluate my application. So is that the shortest opening statement?
Could be.
Okay.
Let me
Well received.
let me start. You've been a magistrate for. One of our jobs on the court is the administration of the judicial system, and magistrates are sometimes the most important people because they're the first face anybody sees in the court system.
Correct.
But the question to me is, you've been working with the magistrate system for about a year and a half. What do you think about how it works and how it might be improved?
When I was interviewed for the magistrate nominating or appointing commission, what you said is what I said. This is the point at which most Iowans come in contact with the judicial system, and the impression that they will form about how the justice system works is largely going to be most people don't end up in district court, thankfully. How does it work? I think it works imperfectly. I think that the people, and I deal with the people, obviously, who've just been arrested. I deal with the initial appearances, with the small claims, and that. The biggest thing that from that experience, and when I prosecute, and I prosecute for 28 years, is that especially in criminal cases, people who have been victimized by crime would like to be made whole. They would like to have restitution. And I live in a small county. There's about 18,000 population. People know who I am. And when people grab me by the scruff of my neck on the street and want to talk about something, usually it'll be something I was a victim of a crime, my property was stolen, or I had medical bills from assault. And I don't, I'm getting $1.13 every month, or I haven't got anything about it. So I think the judicial system needs to improve its responsiveness in providing services to victims.
Yeah.
Does that answer, or was that too
maybe
oblique?
I want to be a little more specific, maybe, and I don't want to cross-examine you, so I apologize.
Oh, that's fine.
I still got this lawyer in me. I've been here 7 years, but what county are you in?
Tama County.
And is that a full-time or part-time magistrate job?
It's a part-time magistrate.
What I'm wondering is about the efficiencies of the part-time magistrates versus maybe full-time magistrates sharing over county lines. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? Our limited jurisdiction commission recommended that very thing, but you're on the front lines. What do you think about it?
I think the system that we have now works well. I like the idea of justice coming locally. And I'm probably in a somewhat unique situation in Tama County because the other magistrate is a non-attorney magistrate. She's been a magistrate for 12 years. When I applied last year, I replaced another lawyer who was a magistrate and who was a friend and is a friend. When I had my interview with that nominating commission, at the end they said, "Is there anything else you want to tell us?" And I said, I told them this. I said, if my being appointed would mean that this lay magistrate would not be serving as magistrate, don't appoint me. For a number of reasons, and one was I think it's important for civilians or average people to be involved in the judicial system, and there were other considerations as well. And one of the attorneys on the commission who had been a magistrate before and who did not get appointed 4 years before just kind of looked at me and smiled and said, you know, that's exactly what I said 4 years ago. The implication was he said that and he didn't get appointed. But I guess to answer your question, I think it's good to have local accountability. I think the system that we have, at least in Tama, we have 2 magistrates. We need two magistrates. It would be more than I could handle by myself, even in a county of 18,000 population. And the other thing that happens is the magistrates from Benton County, which is my county to the east, have been helpful in filling in for me when I'm unavailable. And I think we work together. I think the system works pretty well.
Thank you. Any questions from the right side of the table? Mr. Pace.
Thank you, Justice Wiggins. Good afternoon.
Hi.
I'm from Cedar Rapids, and I'm trying to remember if we've run into each other or not. I don't recall that we have, but and as I'm looking at your documents, there's a reference to legislative assistant and legislative director for U.S. Representative Senator Charles Grassley in Washington. In other words, you were doing legislative work, working with the legislative process.
True.
One of the things that we've been talking with folks about is we've got a legislature who appropriates money for the court system. And how can the court, the Supreme Court, and how would you, if you were appointed to it, help with the legislative system and trying to get some more funding for the court system?
Well, I'm not sure that, I was going to say, if we met and if you did criminal defense work in Tama County, I hope I was fair to you at least. But
I don't do any criminal work, so that's probably the reason we haven't met.
in terms of the time that I spent working for Congressman Senator Grassley was in the House of Representatives and then a year in the Senate. And he is probably not, his reputation, I think, is for being pretty frugal and stingy in terms of spending tax money. So that may not be a real good qualification for having insights in how to get money from the government. My experience there was good. What I learned is that there's the system, the political process that you learn about in college or in the textbooks of how this is how a bill becomes law and this is how the legislative process works. That's true to some extent, but there's a whole another level of persuasion and influence and funding that takes place out of sight. And in the legislative center, just like in the practice of law, I think as a lawyer, especially in a small town, your reputation is the most important thing you have. If you ever pull it fast when you get one chance to be deceptive or to do something to take advantage of somebody, and nobody will ever trust you again. And the same thing I think holds true in the legislature. And I worked actually for Senator Grassley in 1970 when he was in the Iowa legislature, and I was an intern for him. I was going to Drake University. That's how I got acquainted. But I guess the point I'd make there is honesty and dealing with people straightforwardly, not saying things that aren't so or puffing things. I think that's the best way to communicate. And if there are needs, you have to be able to make your case.
Thank you. Yep, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on this, Ms. Dixon?
Good afternoon,
Hi.
sir. And this is an easy question because it wasn't covered in your brief opening statement, but why do you want to be on the Iowa Supreme Court? And what attributes do you have?
I think the question, I thought it was in the written question, but the short answer is to return at least a portion of that which I have been given. I have been blessed growing up in a country, in a society, in Justice Wiggins, you're from Chicago originally?
Yes.
You went to the U of I Circle campus?
Yes, I did.
And I grew up in Chicago. I guess the point is that I have received a lot from people, all the way from my grade school teachers to my scout master to my Little League coach to professors in college and people that just went out of their way to help me out. It's something that I didn't realize or appreciate at the time. And the Bible says, to those that much has been given, much is expected. And so it may be presumptuous of me to say this, but I think I have something to offer, even though I'm 61 years of age. And that's kind of pushing the upper age limit here. But I think I have something to offer, to make a contribution, my experience, my knowledge, my integrity, my ideas, my ability to think, to give something back.
Thank you.
That sounds trite. I apologize.
Thank you.
Anything else from that side of the table?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, Ms. Deneve.
Do you like the aspect of research and writing? Does that kind of excite you when you think about the Supreme Court?
I do. I did a lot of, I actually, believe it or not, I actually do some research as magistrate. I try and open the code at least once a month to, and as prosecutor too. We don't come out of law school knowing much of anything. We know where to look or how to look, and I did enjoy that aspect of finding what the law was, or finding cases which I thought supported my position, or which I thought I maybe could construe to support my position. I didn't like it much when the research went contrary to my point of view, but yes, I do enjoy that. Okay. And I enjoy writing too.
Okay, good.
I was a features editor of my high school newspaper, Thornridge High School, Dalton, Illinois.
Where from?
Yeah, I lived in the south side of
We're
Chicago.
in the south side.
In South Holland, Thornridge High School. It's in Dalton, Illinois.
North side, Evanston, so.
What
The
town?
north side, Evanston, so.
Okay, all right.
Anybody else in this? How about this side? Mr. Cook?
Sir, thank you for applying. I appreciate your comments about the magistrate position and the average person that's been serving as a magistrate, and your desire to see that average people are involved in the process, which reminds me of a sort of humorous quote that, 50% of us are below average. But that's not my question.
Except if you are a fan of Prairie Home Companion, where all the children are above average.
Yeah, there you go. Men are hardworking. Right. My real question, though, sir, is what would you find most frustrating about this job if you got it?
Boy, that's something I hadn't thought of. Most frustrating. Have you asked this question to other people, or?
No, sir.
We have to save some for the end.
Well, I suppose maybe the frustration I have with the judicial system as a whole, and that is the amount of time that it takes to get from point A from the beginning of a case until its conclusion. To me, that's the most frustrating part of the judicial process, both in the criminal law context and in civil cases as well. The last murder trial I did, the murder was committed in October, and we did not get the case tried until a year and a half later in February. So for that year and a half, we had the victims' families and the witnesses, and also the defendant's family, and who were waiting for a resolution of the process. So I think probably the slowness of the process. Now, the difference that one person can make in that is, I don't know. But I do know. I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I was working on a defendant. He had a number of prior felony convictions, and so I wanted to charge him with habitual offender. And I found that one of his prior felony convictions took place in the late 1950s, and it was a burglary. It happened in southwest Iowa, I think in Clarinda. And he had been arrested on one day and pled guilty and was sentenced and was in Fort Madison within 2 days after that. Now, I'm not saying that that was necessarily the best way to go, but it really illustrates to me how things have changed over the past 50 years in terms of the length of time from the inception of a case to the end of it. And I guess that would probably be the biggest frustration, is the amount of time that it takes.
Thank you.
Any other questions down this way? Mr. Brody?
Thank you very much for being here and for your application. And although I don't think we've ever met, it doesn't seem, you don't seem to be someone who is prone to hyperbole. So I was kind of struck in your material that you provided when you say that I believe the adherence to the rule of law and our founding principles is the only hope our republic has of surviving. I was wondering, and as one of the reasons why you wanted to be considered to be a Supreme Court justice, I was wondering what prompted you to write that, and what do you think you could have to offer to help protect us from that?
Well, I think it's article, I don't want to pretend that I read the Iowa Constitution or U.S. Constitution every week. I don't. But in Article 12 of the Iowa Constitution, it clearly says that the Constitution of Iowa is the supreme law of the state. Why is the Constitution important to me? Because a state constitution or federal constitution, if we do not have a fixed set of rules which everyone can count on being followed, then we will cease to be a nation of laws, and we would become a nation of passion or personalities. Perhaps the reason I wrote that is I recently read a book called The 5,000-Year Leap. I don't know if anybody else has read it, but it's a book about the founding of the United States of America, what our founding fathers went through, what they were thinking when they were writing the Constitution. And they intended the United States Constitution to be a document that would be perpetual. I think they anticipated that society would change. I don't think they could have imagined the extent to which society has changed, but I think they anticipated we would be a growing, evolving society. But they understood that human nature does not change. And the constitutions are necessary to protect the individual people from our baser instincts, our baser natures, and to protect the freedom of individuals from a government which they really did not trust. So does that, I may, and I don't know if and I appreciate your saying that I don't seem given to hyperbole. Some of my friends might disagree
Okay.
with you, but does that answer your question?
Oh, yes, it does. I was just struck by it.
I just think this may get me in trouble with some of you, that there's two schools of thought. One is the Constitution is there and it's set in stone. The other is that the Constitution is a living, breathing document that evolves over time. I take the prior approach because, as I said, human nature does not change.
Thank
That
you.
may be my Dutch Reform background speaking.
Okay.
Mr. Holm?
Good afternoon, Mr. Vander, and thank you very much for your application. I imagine that in magistrate court, you obviously on a daily basis are dealing with people and very serious problems that they confront in their lives. And I'm wondering what skills you feel you've developed or have improved upon as a magistrate that you believe would aid you as a justice of the Supreme Court.
I think not that prosecutors don't look at both sides. I never prosecuted a case in 28 years where I was not firmly convinced. Now, juries didn't always agree with me, but my standard of proof is I cannot have any doubt. But as magistrate, I think you're forced even more to look at both sides of an issue, to look at both sides of an issue more. And also, I would say that dealing with people one-on-one when they're standing right in front of you, or when I'm down in the jail on weekends, seeing the people who just got arrested the night before and they're probably hungover, and sometimes, not always, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. I think that's given me a little bit more empathy into we're all fallible, none of us are perfect, and that the people that the defense bar in Tama County probably wouldn't believe that I'm actually saying this, but that sometimes justice should be tempered with mercy.
Any other questions? Ms. Williams?
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you for your application.
Thank you.
Could you tell us what the biggest challenge would be going from a magistrate position to Supreme Court if you were selected?
This may sound like a flip answer. The first thing that springs to mind is the commute. It's 13 miles from my little acreage to the Tama County. I think the biggest challenge, and this would be a full-time job as opposed to a part-time magistrate. And I think the biggest change would be that the Supreme Court is a court that does not take evidence or size up the evidence and testimony in terms of you're not there listening to what people are saying and making judgments on as to veracity. So you have to go based upon the record that's provided to you by the appellant and appellee. So I think that would probably be the biggest change for me, is not getting to eyeball. And I believe a lot in eyeballing people. You have to go by the record. I think that'd probably be the biggest change.
Any other questions from the panel? Mr. Vander, we thank you very much for you putting your name in and your appearance today, and we wish you the best of luck.
I appreciate it. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.